Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lauren Christella, and I'm the president and CEO of the Committee of 70. Committee of 70 is one of the founding partners of the PA Civics Coalition and is a nearly 120-year-old nonpartisan, nonprofit, good government group based in Philadelphia, but serving all of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us and for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedules to get an update on the state of civics in Pennsylvania. We've got a phenomenal lineup for you today, and I'll walk through that a little quickly. But before that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim Gerlach to tell us a little bit more about PA Civics.
Thanks very much, Lauren, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is an exciting event for our partners of PA Civics, and we really appreciate your time. And thank you also to Dr. Mumin and the other presenters that are going to be on the program with us today. Maybe some of you aren't familiar with PA Civics, so let me just give you a quick background as to who we are. We are a coalition of former members of Congress, actually a bipartisan group, as well as prominent civic organizations who all agree that we must work together to promote comprehensive civics education and civic engagement across Pennsylvania schools and communities. So why did this effort start? Well, for a couple of reasons. We all recognize, I think all of us on the call today, that in the old saying that great citizens are not born, but are made. And we think as a result that requires good education, good foundational education, as people grow up through the educational system in Pennsylvania to learn not only their rights and responsibilities as citizens, but also how to apply those rights and responsibilities and apply that knowledge in problem solving in their communities across Pennsylvania and, of course, our country. The passage of Act 35 back in 2018 now provides us all, I think, with a terrific opportunity to work with educators all across the state to strengthen civics education in Pennsylvania and to develop significantly more civic-minded and civic-educated young people for our future. So that's why former members of Congress, including myself and 4 or 5 others, as well as the 14 civic organizations that have been already identified, in fact, they're on the screen in front of you, have come together to try to help lead the effort at this really important juncture in our Commonwealth and national history. And we hope that through this program today, you're going to understand why civics education is so important to our future. And most importantly, we hope your participation provides you with additional information and insights that will help you better educate and develop the citizens of the future that we all desperately need to tackle the issues and the challenges that will face us. So again, on behalf of PA Civics and all of our partners, we thank you for those that are joining us to listen, joining us to be panelists, and of course, Dr. Mumin as a contributor to the program. So thank you all. Look forward to a great session. And now turn it, I think, over to Lauren again, who will go through the agenda, and then we'll move forward.
Thanks so much, Jim. So correct. We're going to jump right into a series of fantastic discussions, starting with remarks by our Pennsylvania Secretary of Education, Dr. Khalid Mumin. From there, we will go to a panel on how we test civics with some phenomenal leaders from PA Youth Vote and the Jack Miller Center, both partners in the PA Civics Coalition. Our next panel following that will be about civics in the classroom, where we're going to hear from teachers about how you're approaching civics in each of your classrooms, and hopefully we'll have some great ideas to share and challenges and successes to report on there. Then we'll go into civics in the community. This is a terrific opportunity to hear from civic education organizations like Generation Citizen, and also other groups like the Lower Bucks County Chamber of Commerce. It's going to be a terrific, robust conversation. And then we'll conclude with a discussion from Julia Kaufman from the RAND Corporation, who is based in Pittsburgh and has authored an essay on the systemic change needed to address the poor NAEP scores that were released earlier this year, the outlook there. So finally, we'll end with some questions. So save your questions. Please use the Q&A function. We will make sure they all get posed to the panelists that you'll hear from today. Another note that we are recording, and you can, we'll distribute this recording. You'll see it on the Constitution Center's website and YouTube channel. And we're so excited to share this and other resources for you. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Beth Specker. Oh, Jim, you're introducing Beth.
Well, let me introduce Beth real quickly. One of our founding partners of PA Civics. Beth was a terrific leader and helped us as we had the concept put out there to a number of folks around the Commonwealth. And she grasped hold of this concept very early on, and we could not have moved this whole organization forward without Beth's organizing efforts and administrative support efforts. So my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Rendell Center for Civics and Civic Education, Beth Specker. Beth?
Oh, thank you very much, Jim, for those kind remarks. Delighted to be here with everyone to explore civics education. It's what the Rendell Center is all about, and it's indeed my distinct honor to introduce our Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. For over 25 years, Dr. Khalid Mumin has served in various capacities as a teacher, a dean of students, a principal, central administrator. So he knows firsthand what happens in the schools. Most recently, he served as the superintendent of the schools in Lower Merion School District. He started his career as a secondary English teacher in Scotland, Pennsylvania. So he's one of Pennsylvania's own. And he rose, as I mentioned, through the leadership ranks of the education system in Pennsylvania. He is committed to promoting and sustaining student achievement, equity, and access to educational programming for all students, as well as creating plans that are fiscally responsible. He's been recognized nationally as a school board savvy superintendent, and is the author of a book entitled Problem Child: Leading Students Living in Poverty Towards Infinite Possibilities of Success. So it's my distinct honor to bring forward on our Zoom stage the Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who will talk about the state of civics education in Pennsylvania. Doctor?
Thank you so much, Beth, and good afternoon, everyone. As Beth said, I'm the Secretary of Education, Dr. Khalid Mumin, and I am thrilled to be here today to talk about civics education in the Commonwealth. At the Pennsylvania Department of Education, we are committed to providing students with a world-class education, and civics education helps them understand how they fit into the world. We know that students who experience high-quality civic education are more likely to vote and discuss politics at home, more likely to complete college and develop employable skills, and 4 times more likely to volunteer and work on community issues, and are more confident in their ability to speak publicly and communicate with their elected officials. While the benefits of civic education are clear, we also know that schools can at times struggle to provide this engaging curriculum to students. Here in Pennsylvania, Act 35 outlines how school entities can teach students about civics. State academic standards, which are approved by the State Board of Education, guide school entities in developing a strong curriculum that includes civic knowledge. The academic standards provide the foundation to implement the developed curriculum. The modeling of civic behavior by educators, administrators, and community members, and opportunities for students to participate in civic endeavors are part of a quality civic education program. Research tells us that quality civics education programs have 3 pillars, 3 very strong pillars. One is knowledge. And knowledge is a fundamental understanding of the structure of government and the processes by which government passes laws and make policy. Skills, abilities necessary to participate as active and responsible citizens in democracy. And 3, actions. Those are the activities of citizens that include voting, participating in community meetings, volunteering, communicating with elected and appointed officials, and signing petitions. When a civics program has all three pillars, students can understand the meaning of we, the people, and how they fit in. They can become productive and engaged citizens and understand that the government of the United States is theirs. PDE assembled a group of national, state, and local experts in civic education to form the Civics Advisory Council. PDE, in consultation with the Civics Advisory Council, has created a toolkit available online on the Standards Aligned system and the PDE website. And on the precipice of America's upcoming 250th birthday, PDE is actively participating in the A250PA Commission, and we are in the process of creating an A250PA toolkit for the field. This will be a new, unique tool for schools to add to their toolkits. Now let's talk a little bit about the data. While this year's NAEP report card showed a slight drop nationally, I know that our educators are here in the Commonwealth are committed to teaching students about our government and their role in it. We are at a pivotal moment in our country, and building unity begins in our classrooms. Helping students learn about our history enables them to play an active role in shaping our future. The Shapiro administration's vision for the future is defined by two simple words: real freedom. Again, the vision of the Shapiro administration is defined by two simple words: real freedom. And when it comes to education, that means giving every child the freedom to chart their own course. That means the freedom to learn in a safe and healthy environment. That means the freedom to achieve their dreams regardless of their zip code. And that means the freedom to learn, grow, and participate actively in our society. By providing learners with a high quality education, together, teachers and administrators, school districts and intermediate units, we are going to keep real freedom alive for generations to come. I must say again that I am extremely excited and motivated to continue to engage in this work. And I thank you so much for your time and your participation in this important effort during these paramount times here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So on behalf of PDE, thank you for your continued partnership and hard work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Secretary. We really appreciate your time, your thoughts, and the support of the Shapiro administration for civics education in the Commonwealth. And we look forward to continuing our work together. So I'm sure we'll be talking with your staff and hope to see you again on another one of PA Civics programs. So I believe now I am going to introduce our next panel. And I will begin with Hans Zeiger. He is the president of the Jack Miller Center, a nationwide network of scholars and teachers who are committed to advancing the core texts and ideas of American political tradition. Hans previously served in state and local government in Washington State. He gained a reputation as a bipartisan collaborator, being named by the National Institute for Civil Discourse as a co-recipient of the Gabrielle Kifferts Award for Civility in State Governance in 2015. Joining him on the panel is Abigail Dim. She's a former social studies teacher and current PhD candidate in political science and education at the University of Pennsylvania. She uses mixed methods and community-engaged research to approach the study of politics and practices of civic education. She will be discussing how we currently assess civics learning and some potential ways forward. Hans, Abby, welcome to our virtual stage.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Beth. And it's a great pleasure to be part of this coalition, PA Civics, and to see how this is unfolding and really a movement building for civic education, civic learning in Pennsylvania. And it's a great privilege to be able to turn over the floor now to Abby to talk about her research. Go ahead, Abby.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. And it's truly a pleasure to be here. As I was introduced, my name is Abby Dim. I'm currently a graduate student studying civic education. I'm a former social studies teacher. And I just want to name, we all know this, but there's incredible diversity of expertise here. And so I, particularly as a former teacher and community organizer, I'm positioning this here with information about research. And so this is just one piece of this like vast knowledge puzzle of experts that we need to solve and work on improving civics. Great, the slides work. So I'm going to talk about rethinking civics, and particularly rethinking civics in terms of how are we making sure that our assessments are aligned with the goals of Act 35 and so many other policies that are trying to make sure that young people are becoming these engaged, thoughtful citizens. Just quickly, an outline of the slides. I'm just going to go through the state of civics. This was already discussed, so it'll be really brief. I'm going to talk a little bit about the academic research that exists. And I just want to underscore the reason for that is that we have some really good evidence out there for what does and doesn't work. And it also shows us what we need to research moving forward. I'll talk a bit about my research, which is what I'm calling rethinking civics. And as was discussed, talk about assessment. And then I'll discuss next steps in future research, which I know we'll be talking about in one of our last panels as well. So just briefly, the state of civics, as was discussed already. Why civics? We all know this. I'm preaching to the choir here. Civics helps us with democratic citizenship. We know that knowledge matters. We want our young people to know more and to know more about politics. It helps with self-efficacy. I'm going to bring this up a few times. And what I mean by that is we want young people to feel like they can make change in their community, that kind of belief that they have the power to do so. Trust in government, we know that motivates more engagement, and we want this to be a bipartisan effort, and we want young people to be thinking in those bipartisan ways starting at a young age. And so this is hopefully the wordiest text here, but I just want to underscore some of the things that key political science research says about political knowledge and why I talk about knowledge in particular, and I'll get to the 3 pillars because those are crucial. But for the most part and historically, civic education does focus on knowledge. And so does the Act 35. The vast majority of assessments are testing knowledge. And so knowledge matters. And as the slide says, when the public has high levels of political knowledge, they're better able to update their civic schema, their perception of politics with new information related to policy, develop political views aligned with genuine policy preferences, meaning they can actually make sure what they believe is aligned to the policies they're selecting. They can hold government accountable. We know that's paramount for democratic life. And they feel they can effectively choose representatives that meet their preferences. And there's ample behavioral and institutional political science research that underscores these realities. So knowledge truly matters. But we also know that civic knowledge, at least based on these test scores, it's not always the best picture. And we're all working so hard here to change that picture. And it certainly exists because of reasons outside of education as well. But I just want to state about 60% of states have some kind of civics requirement, or at least a half-year requirement. And so it's great that PA is a leader in emphasizing civics. This is the 31% of states that have a test requirement, and 22% of young people, I just want to state this, NAEP, this is the recent scores, say that students scored at proficient or above in civics. It's just 22%. Now I'm going to pick apart a little bit about what these tests, this data means, but I just want to say that this is low, right? And so when we read this in national headlines, it's concerning, especially for folks here who care so deeply about political knowledge. And so this is the status, and we're like, well, what's going on? And so what I want to do is look at some of the academic research that tells us what is happening in civics that works, where is it happening, and for whom is it working? And I do want to underscore that in my work and as a teacher and as a researcher, there's a really crucial equity lens that I want to underscore. So this is what's working and who's it working for in academic research. Or what it tells us. So here's what we know. So leading with some evidence-based research, we know that formal civics improves knowledge. Everyone here knows that. If you're learning about civics content, you probably will know more. And there's compelling evidence to support that. It also can shrink gaps, which means that when all young people have access to civic education, the different kinds of inequities around historically marginalized groups along lines of race and class, those can shrink in terms of knowledge outcomes. And of course, this does rely on access to excellent civics, which I'll keep talking about. We know that excellent civics courses can help improve students' self-efficacy, again, belief in their ability to make change, their trust in government, and their interest. And we know that efficacy, trust, and interest in politics all matter for lifelong engagement in political life. We also know that pedagogy is as important to content, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from teachers next. So it's not just what are we teaching, but how are we teaching it? And there's ample evidence in political science and education that things like open classroom climates, structured academic controversy, Socratic seminars, there are lots of pedagogies, including active learning, that support young people to learn more, to know more for longer, and to feel efficacious and trusting. I do just want to underscore some elements here that are important that the research also shows us. First is this concept of civic debt, which is this brilliant thinker named Jane Lowe. And so the idea is that there actually is a debt that because of the inequities that exist around who's getting civics and what kind of civics are they getting. And so we really, as a state and as a coalition, thinking, how are we rolling out civics that truly supports equitable participation among all young people? We need to think about who has access and how. And so that's something that the research tells us, is that there are inequities that this person, Jean Lowe, calls civic debt. And as I say here, Shapiro and Brown underscore that there is unequal and inequitable access to civics. Things that we already know and probably in large part are what bring us all here. And I just want to name this concept of political socialization, is that there's a kind of explicit civic education that is happening in civics classrooms, but there's also a civic education that's sort of hidden, which is young people are interacting with government every day by attending particularly public schools. And in doing so, we are showing young people what kinds of citizenship is being expected of them and asked of them. And so that's something that I work on in my own work and happy to talk about further. But schools are civics learning institutions, and we all really know that. And so there are some civic puzzles that remain from the literature. There's many. I'm just highlighting a few here. One is that we continue to have low turnout and knowledge despite increases in education. Though I do not want to perpetuate the myth that young people are not engaged and interested. They truly are, more than ever. But I do just want to say that even with increases in education, we're still not seeing as much of a growth in these kinds of knowledge and voter turnout outcomes. We also are left with questions like, how long does civics learning stay with youth? Does factual knowledge really lead to engagement? And are assessments the best way to test civics? And so this is where I'm asking the question in my own research, which I'll move to now, is we want civics. We know civics matters. We know that we need to figure out more how it matters, but we know that it matters in important ways. And as we're saying, we want more civics. My big question is, do we want more of the same, or do we need to critically rethink the kinds of civics that all students are getting? And I believe the answer is yes. So I'm arguing that we need to rethink civics along the lines of the existing incredible policy work that's happening. And I know I already said this, but I just want to underscore genuinely how incredible it is that the state of Pennsylvania, we passed Act 35 in 2018, implemented it in 2020 during a pandemic. So really incredible things that are happening. And so I just want to say that I acknowledge that, while also thinking, like, how can we continue to critically reconceptualize what's being accessed by young people all over the state and the Commonwealth. And so I want to highlight these pillars as we're rethinking civics. We have knowledge, and I think many civics programs are doing a great job, though many could do better, in making sure that young people are knowing the knowledge that they need to know to be engaged. And the Act 35 tests, and I've seen many of them from across the state. I'm happy to talk about some of my ways of collecting that info, that we need more of it. Most of the tests for testing Act 35 or through Act 35 are asking fact-based questions, mostly through multiple choice. And there's a lot of benefits to that test-taking approach, but really that's only testing knowledge. It really does not have a way, we do not have a way, large scale, to test whether young people are experiencing the benefits and the crucial components of these other pillars, the skills and the actions. And so this is what I want to highlight in particular. If we really want young people to, move towards, and I wrote this down, move towards real freedom, and to be able to, apply all three pillars to be we the people, which is truly what we're all working for, to build responsible and engaged citizens, we need to think about how are we testing civics, but making sure that it's in a way that really honors not only the multiple and diverse lived experiences of young people all over the state, but is making sure that we're prioritizing experiences around these skills and actions. And so I would push us to think about how can we make sure that we're emphasizing the importance of those elements, and can we emphasize the importance of these active elements if we're only testing through multiple choice tests? So this is something I posit to everyone and think we should continue to consider in our policy moving forward. So I just want to state here basically what I just said, but I'm a visual learner, so here it is written. If the primary goal of civic education is to create engaged citizens in a pluralist nation, then we need to reconsider if assessing student ability to memorize facts through mandatory testing is the most appropriate assessment. And again, I want to say I was a teacher for a long time. There's a place for these types of tests and multiple choice. There's no reason to throw that out. I just want to keep us considering and in my work, pushing us to think about how can we make sure that young people are also getting the experience being active and building the skills and practicing the actions they need to, when they graduate, go out into the world and be bipartisan and engaged in political life. And so these are the questions that I posit. What are our bipartisan goals for civics? How can do we build curricula towards achieving these goals? Again, truly emphasizing not just knowledge, but also the skills and actions. And how do we incorporate diverse lived political experiences into curricula that fosters self-efficacy, trust, and political interest? And so in addition to rethinking the assessments, I just want to talk briefly about my research before I wrap up. That has been working with, I've interviewed over 150 Pennsylvanians. I started in Philly and then expanded out and sampled throughout the state for diverse young people. My question to them was, what do you want and need to learn in your civics classes in order to feel like your lived political experience is being heard, and also that you're learning the skills that you need to be engaged? And I just want to say as well that I'm really centering young people as experts in their own lived experience, and also as the key stakeholders of policy. We adults know a lot of things and should be leading the charge in many ways, but I also think young people should be at every table making these sorts of decisions. And so I just want to say briefly, and would be extremely excited to continue talking about this with anyone who wants to talk more about my research. But young people, by and large, across the street from so many different kinds of lived experiences, say that civic knowledge matters. They really support Act 35 and they support being, even tested in civics. They think it's crucial, but they have some opposition to mandatory testing. And again, this doesn't mean that the policy should change, but it means we should continue to think about how we can expand our conception of understanding what young people need to know. So sometimes they feel like the content is irrelevant. They think it's redundant with history. They want clarity around what civics really means. And they feel like they're being tested on the what more than the how to. How do they go to the ballot box? How do they, literally get there? How do they register? These are questions that many young people have. And of course, most of the young people I spoke with didn't want to take another test. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't necessarily. So this is, again, expanding our conception of what it means to assess civic skills, knowledge, and actions. And I'll just state quickly the key takeaways from my extensive research across the state is that young people want to learn local politics. They really want to learn about political representatives and activities that are happening in their lives. It helps them to feel more efficacious. And this is aligned with curricular relevance. They want to learn about people and policies that are related to their lives. And point 3, they like to do this learning through active learning. They really want to be hands-on, problem solving, working with community and government. And all of these things, as I've said many times, facilitate more self-efficacy and trust. When students are learning about things that are related to their daily political lives, both policies and representatives, and they're doing it in ways where they have responsibility and can speak to their lived experience, can ask questions related to their lived experience, but also, really get their hands into governance, they increase their sentiments of feeling like they can make change. And so the next steps and future research here and in the wider world of civic education work, there are some challenges to Act 35 implementation, but in general, all over, we know there are systemic inequities, as I've mentioned. There are inconsistent standards across the state. This is one of the beauties of having a federated system of government. It's also one of the challenges. How can we know who's getting what they need? I'm also just acknowledging I have maybe 20 more seconds. We also have to recognize political context. How are we supporting teachers with all backgrounds to feel comfortable and confident teaching political material in a bipartisan way and a nonpartisan way? How can we support families in feeling like they can support schools teaching civics? And we also really need to think about what are our evaluation and reporting requirements so that we can know what is happening in schools and support the needs that come up from teachers and other educators. And so, as I said, just some research needs. We want some detailed data collection, as I've, to make sure we know what's the landscape. I also just want to keep arguing that we want to emphasize youth voice as key stakeholders, particularly youth from historically minoritized and underrepresented communities in the civic process, and also just ongoing policy innovation and support, which is why I'm so grateful to be part of this coalition. And so I'll stop there. I'm sorry for going a minute over, but I'm really excited to have given that overview. I have my email here, and I'd love to continue hearing from folks and continue talking about this with anyone who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abigail, and thank you for all the work you've put into this research and for giving the due attention to civic education. I was asked to just briefly talk about the civics landscape as we see it at the Jack Miller Center. We're a Philadelphia-based organization, and I'll make this very brief. Our origin story has to do with the neglect of civic education at the collegiate level, and we're involved from K-12 through college. But one of the real areas of concern for us is making sure that civics is taken seriously in our colleges and universities across this country. So we work with over 1,000 scholars of American political thought, American history, and other fields who are concerned about teaching civics to their students and making sure that it gets the attention that it deserves at the collegiate level. So lots that could be said about that, but just wanted to put that out there and invite any further conversation with any of you on this call. And now I'm going to turn it over to Madison Steele, who is going to moderate our next session, which has to do with civics in the classroom. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Hans. Really excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Madison. I'm the Manager of Education and Outreach at the National Constitution Center. And one of the best parts of my job is that I get to work with educators across the country, but especially in this very wonderful state of Pennsylvania, and learn a little bit about what civics looks like in their classrooms. So I'm going to go ahead and add our friends to this panel here. I am so delighted that we have a number of folks joining us today. Let me get them all on screen, and then we can go ahead and begin. There's Nathan. Awesome. All right, and then I'm looking for, there's Nathan. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I think it was just absolutely fascinating to hear all about Abby's research, but I did want to point out that we have a number of people on this call who are not educators, and they're members of the community or other civic ed organizations. And I think it's so valuable for everyone to learn about what civics looks like inside the walls of the classroom. So I'm delighted to welcome today. We have three amazing panelists. Nathan Salamone is joining us, where he teaches AP US Government and Politics, Civics, and Constitution 101, while serving as a Social Studies Department Chair at Universal Android Charter High School. He is a proud member of the Teacher Advisory Council for the National Constitution Center, and he is also on the National Council History of Educators. He is a two-time Universal Companies Teacher of the Year recipient, and over the course of his career, Mr. Salamone has participated in many summer institutes, including the Mount Vernon Teacher Institute, Any Age Punishment, The American Story, The Quest for Freedom, York Street, Johnsbury AP Summer Institutes, and the First Amendment Institute through the Rendell Center. Also joining us is Sam Foreman. Sam taught civics and U.S. history at Friar Charter High School for 7 years. Sam is now a PA Civics coordinator, and he is using his experience in the classroom and his soon-to-be completed master's degree in education policy to support and expand civic ed across the Commonwealth. And then finally, we are also joined by Sarah Harris, who is the Director of Education at the National Constitution Center. But before joining us, Sarah was a teacher for 5 years, and she really enjoyed that time in the high school setting, and she has some fantastic stories to share with all of us today as well. So welcome, Sarah, Sam, and Nathan. I'm so excited that you're here. And I just want to dive right in and ask all of you to kind of paint us a picture of what civic education looks like in the classroom, in your classroom. What norms are you establishing to create meaningful civic learning for your students? Sarah, we'll start with you and then we'll make our way around if you want to kick us off.
Perfect. I would love to. And can you just give me a thumbs up that you can hear me okay? I had some microphone issues earlier. Fantastic. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today. And so in kind of thinking about some of the norms that I always like to implement, that I always like to share, there's one in particular that has stuck with me over the past 6 months or so, since a teacher at a summer program kind of pointed it out to me. So we always share norms at the National Constitution Center. It connects so nicely to our piece of our educational framework focused on civil dialogue. And so we always kind of talk about, listening to learn and being present and making sure that you're there. And one of the teachers said that in her school, the norm that they have is to be where your feet are. And I kind of paused a little bit and I was like, that's it. Okay. And then when I thought about it some more, I thought, what a great thing, right? Because right now my feet are in my office with you all, right? We are all here together. It's not thinking about my grocery list. It's not thinking about what I have to do after this panel is over. It's here focusing on kind of what we're doing together. And so in kind of listening to the speaker before this too, talking about how important it is to engage in local civics too, right? That students really want to learn about their own community and how important that is to kind of highlight, where you are in the moment and what you can do in that present moment where you're currently located. And I think that that's a really important norm to consider when you're having a discussion in the classroom, when you're focusing on kind of the task at hand, or when you're considering what kind of civics looks like in the classroom and out in your community as well. One of our teachers from the summer actually made that into a poster, be where your feet are, and I can't wait to print it. The next time you all see me on Zoom, it'll be behind me. So I'm really excited to engage with that too.
Sarah, that was amazing. I love that. Be where your feet are. Nathan is joining us live from his classroom. Thank you so much. Please tell us, what does civic ed look like in your classroom? What norms do you establish to create impactful civic learning?
First of all, thank you so much, Madison, for everyone for coming to this. This is beyond an honor. I really feel that in a classroom, the students are the people responsible for their education and responsible for creating our own norms. So every classroom, we develop norms together and we discuss, what does quality education look like? How do you show respect, responsibility, honesty, and caring? I'm a YMCA kid, so we go back to that. And throughout the entire year, I always try to reflect on our interests and what it means to grow up in Philadelphia and the world around you, both in the local, the state, and national level. We at Audenried are a CTE school, so everyone who comes here also can have a degree in getting certifications in automotive and culinary in different fields. So I try to tie in as well to the CTEs and discuss what are skills that will help you grow, not just as a student, but as a person. What is curriculum that maybe you don't always have that can help you evolve to be the person you are, the future worth fighting for? And ultimately, have conversations, talk with each other. We need to have these meaningful, powerful ideas where we try to grow beyond where we are in the moment and who we're going to be one day.
I love that. And your students are oh so lucky. We know that you're such a phenomenal educator. Sam, tell us what your experience was like in the classroom teaching civics, and what you and your students created together to create these moments for impactful civic learning.
Thanks, Madison. Well, I was thinking about what to say, and Nathan brought up norms. And it just really reminded me of something that mattered a lot to me in the classroom and that we pursued, which is that, community-driven norms, the idea that, when a rule, is enforced by the community because it needs to be there, kind of the power that raises for how we can discuss things, no matter what we're discussing. It was really anchoring to my classroom. And as far as other things that really drove my practice as a civic educator, I really tried to tell my students all the time, to the point that they were probably sick of it, that know the system, change the system is really a motto of class, that you can't understand how to participate in something, do something, be something, change something, unless you truly understand it, and kind of building a foundation of learning from the bottom up, and making sure. And we used a lot of building analogies in there, even though I don't come from that technical background. So really trying to bring students into what I was trying to do. I was very much open about it. And I felt that was also modeling good civic behavior, and that allowed us to do a lot of what we accomplished in the classroom together.
I love that. The idea, all three of you had mentioned this idea of building a very solid foundation. So we're going to kind of continue with that analogy. Now that we've laid the foundation, I'm really curious, what are the next steps in your classroom? What do these practices look like? And I'm particularly interested in what students are bringing to the table. Like, what are they so excited to learn about? I think some of our attendees might find that really interesting. Sarah, if you want to kick us off.
Sure thing. So as Madison mentioned, I've been at the center now for about 5 years. And prior to that, I was a high school history teacher. And so obviously 6 years ago, my experiences and engagements with students was a lot different than it is today. But through programs that I am lucky enough to be a part of at the National Constitution Center, I still do get to connect with students on almost a daily basis. And in one of these programs, our scholar exchanges, we have an opportunity to engage with students. And one of the things that I've reflected on is when we ask questions that allow students to build connections, they are incredibly excited to share. And I was reflecting on how that's something that I noticed when I was in the classroom as well. So kind of providing this opportunity for students to connect, not just to modern day, which is obviously the goal that as history educators, we're always so excited to do, but also between different periods in history. Their faces just kind of light up when they can say like, oh, doesn't that kind of remind you of this other thing that we learned about earlier, or what we just read about in the news today? And I think that it's such a wonderful kind of sneaky skill that students don't even know that they're kind of building those muscles, because they're just kind of thinking and reflecting and building on those connections that they're creating. And the kind of added bonus is we get a little bit of an insight into the things that interest them. They're not going to remember things that they aren't interested in. So we also have an opportunity to kind of learn about their own personalities and kind of continue to build that community. The example that popped into my head that's not from a classroom, so just forgive me, is my daughter the other day, who's 5 years old, saw something on TV and she said, "Doesn't that remind you about the thing from Iron Man?" And I said, "Girlfriend, who knew you cared about Iron Man so much?" So I learned a little bit more about Charlotte, just like this kind of provides everybody an opportunity to learn a little bit more about their students as well.
I love that. And who doesn't love Iron Man or Charlotte? Nathan, what are you seeing in the classroom? What are your students super excited to talk about?
I think it comes back to relevancy, and a really big topic is maybe surprising is court cases, but specifically a lot of court cases about students. You can talk about should a student get in trouble and suspended for wearing a black armband for school, which should happen when a cheerleader sends a text that might be a little not the best. And having these conversations and asking these questions, what are the limits of freedom? I had a really great professor at a summer program at Amherst who talked about asking questions that seem obvious, but that are so deep. What is punishment? What is the rights under the Eighth Amendment? What does free speech look like? Having what seems like a simple question could last months of conversation, and you need to go even further and deeper with that. So really trying to engage and have just asking students what they think, asking them what they care about, and then having them use and research the Constitution, not as we want it to, but as it is allowed to do, and what the rules it has kind of set up to begin with. Shout out Constitution Center. As well as that, anything hyperlocal, that was said already, but anything state and local. We talk about the district attorney in Philadelphia. We talk about what is going to happen. We had debates about safe injection sites. These are things that are relevant to our scholars that they're going to talk about outside of the room. Let's bring it into the room. The last thing I'll say is I tell them day one, you're with me 180 days. What do you want to learn? What is the most relevant to you that would make you talk about this in home and outside? Because that is the goal, to continue this building of you have the power. You have the ability to create the world anew. So do it.
I love that. Sam, do you want to share a little bit about what the students at Friar were excited to learn about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this just happened before, but I feel like Nathan, I could have just had him say that for me about Friar. It really reminded me recently, and I think this professor is on this session who assigned me this, but I think last week about education law and about students' rights in school. And she asked, so I was very impressed with what I wrote. And I said, oh, yeah, I have these conversations with my students all the time. And really, I think what that's rooted in is really some students need direction or to see what there is to care about before they really realize what that is. But the power that comes with, I can care about this because I know I can do something about it, or I know what to do about it or what to do with it. And it's very helpful. And by presenting students with the options, I remember going to midterm elections last year. I had my wife made me a bulletin board, and it had some like Pew polling of what are the major subjects, issues, that's what I'm looking for. That people in America were interested in going into the elections, what mattered to them. And we use that all the time. Since we're looking at it every day, and it really was great for getting them to see that things matter to me, but things matter to other people. And we always try to think communally in my classroom about the us and me and us, which I think is important structure, because it's important to work with kids about themselves, but also how they see themselves in their communities, large and small.
That's fantastic. All three of you mentioned this idea of relevancy and personal connection to kind of guide student interest, or really even to just inspire student interest in civic education, which I think is fantastic. I think we're going to end with a nice kind of transition question, which will feed in well to our next panel, which is, for people who are not familiar with, civic ed in the classroom, or what this looks like, we talked about a little bit with norms, but like, what are the concrete civic habits and behaviors that your students are developing in the classroom that they are taking then to the community? Like when they leave the walls of the school, what are they taking with them, and where will we see that in the community? Sarah, do you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, I'd love to. And not to kind of continue on this theme, but Nathan mentioned this before. He's a rock star in this panel. But I think one of the biggest lessons for students, and something that I always try to impart on my students, is to ask the right questions, right? So the types of questions that you ask and where they're focused on is really going to help not just yield a beneficial result, but also shape the conversation that happens afterwards. So we always talk at the National Constitution Center about what the government can do as opposed to what the government should do. And that slight framing in and of itself, I think is really essential when you're talking about how to solve community issues, right? If you have a problem and students are trying to shape something, the first place to start is just what can be done, and then kind of go from there. When I was teaching, I didn't know that distinction. But one of the things that I tried to impart on my students is to make sure that they're asking not just one question, but two questions, and follow it up and dig deeper. And I think kind of building up that skill is something that's essential for students to dive into any resource or material, but also to start to be an active citizen in the world around them.
That's fantastic. Nathan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and really quick, Sarah and Sam, you both are awesome. It's been so great hearing your ideas. I'm writing notes. So I know for my big thing in the classroom is how do you talk? How do you have those honest conversations? And how do you have meaningful dialogues? It's what I always try to come back to, whether it's a dyad conversation, a mock trial, project-based learning. That's where it always kind of comes back to. How do you communicate your ideas effectively and also in a respectful way, in a way that maybe you don't agree at the end, but at least you understand where someone else is coming from, and you have that ability to evolve the dialogue and evolve yourself as well. At the end of the day, there's a place for memorization, there's a place for knowing dates of events and for on, but it's all about the deeper meaning, the deeper connections that occur to us as an American, country, as a people as we are, and how will be in the future, and just trying to really, again, impart upon them that keep going and keep on doing what you're doing and believe, but don't forget to look back too in the rearview mirror. So
I love it. The idea to keep at it. Sam, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to connect back to Abby's presentation and the Act 35 framework, and really agree with her that there's a lot of use in the knowledge, skills, and actions. And I felt that my students left the class with the knowledge and skills. And I really am, one of my motivations for being in this position and caring so much about education policy was, I really wondered what could happen if that investment in civic education happened earlier. If the knowledge and skills happened earlier, kids are naturally curious, and really took advantage of that to really, ground students in, in history of this country and civic history and all those sorts of things. And that's why I ended my class every year. Instead of a final exam, students had to write and deliver. I modified the This I Believe speech project, which I'm sure a lot of us here are familiar with, and had to have an action step. And because I felt students should know, at least I can't make them do anything, but I can ensure that they know as much as they can know, and they have the ability to act on as much as they can, and hope that through that process, they will go out and act on those things. And it's always the best day of the year for me, and it's something I'll miss tremendously. But that's kind of really brings it together for me. It was, control what I knew I could control, and try to get students leaving caring and knowing what to do about what they care about.
That is amazing. I just have to thank all three of you because I know we're out of time, but thank you so much for your work inside and outside of the classroom. It's clear that your students have benefit and will continue to benefit from everything that you've done. We are so grateful for you. We are now going to pivot to civics in the classroom, now to civics in the community. And I am delighted to welcome, here he is, perfect. I'm delighted to welcome Richard Idlin, who is the National Policy Director for Business for America, Pennsylvania. And BFA is a nonprofit, and it works to educate and engage the private sector in supporting civic education in schools and the workplace. BFA works in Pennsylvania, Indiana, Missouri, and nationally in our nation's capital, support a healthy democracy, voting rights, election security, and to decrease polarization. I love that. Richard has been involved in corporate social responsibility and other business-focused public policy issues for 4 decades, including work in the United Nations Environmental Program, New York City government, and the American Sustainable Business Network. Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'm going to bring your panelists on screen.
Great, Madison, thank you. That was a very inspiring panel. Learned a lot and found it very encouraging. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your interest, and I'm glad to be here today. And wanted to give you just a little context about why business and the business community and the private sector cares about this topic of a civically literate public and a civically literate student body. And the work that Business for America does, as Madison suggested, is with companies large and small across the United States, including work we're active in Pennsylvania. And what we have found is that many companies are concerned about increased polarization, civic discord, difficulty listening to ideas that maybe don't resonate with your personal opinion, and that kind of incivility and discord is showing up in the workplace. And it appears that many employees might not have had the experience that we just heard about. They aren't familiar with how government works. They're not sure what the 3 branches of government are. And they may also be, because of the lack of awareness and knowledge, more susceptible to mis and disinformation. So this panel in the next 19 minutes is going to focus on the issue of why businesses care about civic education, what they can do to engage with school districts in partnerships across Pennsylvania, and also what is being done within the workplace to encourage more civic literacy among the workforce. So let me quickly introduce my three colleagues. To my right, over in the top screen, the way I'm looking at is John Dick. John is in Pittsburgh, and he's the founder and CEO of Civic Science, which is a market intelligence platform serving many of the nation's largest brands and media companies. And John has been conducting a lot of data analytics, polling, and research into issues that matter most to key companies in the United States. Elizabeth Clay Roy is a pro-democracy change maker and is a CEO of an organization called Generation Citizen that works with school districts across the country and helps them, provides them with curriculum and works with teachers to help students get a better understanding of applied civics. So how kids actually go and learn what they hear from their teachers and apply it in the broader society. And finally, Joe Saffron, who I saw on the screen, but I know he's there, but Joe, able to put your camera on, great. Otherwise, we'll just make do. Joe is the executive director of the Lower Bucks County Chamber of Commerce. And that organization represents 1,000 members, small, mid, and large companies and professional firms in 22 municipalities in Lower Bucks County. So, John, let me start with you. In conversations that we've had over the past month or two, you've indicated that this idea of polarization, a lack of civility, is causing some challenges in the workplace. So give us a sense as to what some of your research at Civic Source has discovered. And John, you're on mute. There you go. Go ahead.
I had a dog barking. I was trying to spare everyone from that. Thank you for having me. And I'll preface it first by saying that there's the simple reason why businesses need to care about this is because these students all grow up to be adults. And what our data shows us very clearly, the institutional distrust is a learned thing. Younger people tend to trust institutions. We start to see it begin to fall off of a cliff toward the end of their teenage years, going into college and elsewhere. And when we watch how an institutional trust also tends to lead to polarization, as you mentioned earlier, and those things manifest themselves first in the workforce. When we see people who distrust government, distrust business, what have you, end up in workforce, they distrust the businesses often they work for, the leadership that they work for. Then the second problem there, of course, is then with that distrust becomes polarization, and a polarized workforce does not work well with one another. And you have a lot of issues now, particularly where people's political points of view are so much at the forefront. It creates chemistry issues at work, creates trust issues at work. We saw that a lot during COVID with companies trying to implement vaccine programs and the like, and all of that can be traced back to a misunderstanding and a mistrust of government, and that all starts in school.
Right. John, I think that's a really telling point, that this sense of individual polarization can translate into a broader mistrust, as you said, of what the company is saying. And yet many employees find their employer a reputable source of information. So how do you suggest companies address this issue within the workplace?
Well, I mean, there are very practical ways. For example, there are LinkedIn learning sessions on government and civics, and that are available to teams at companies. If we at our company, we subscribe to LinkedIn Learning, there's a lot of great resources there for those kinds of things. And it's easy in our business because we're in the information business, so we have access to a lot of objective, empirical, mathematical information to enlighten people when maybe they're misled by information or otherwise. Encouraging your workers or your employees to be engaged in some manner of volunteerism or politics or whatever else it might be, to be connected to the process is a good thing for businesses to do. It's healthy for morale. It's healthy for chemistry in the company. There are a lot of different ways I think you can encourage that.
Right. And John, we have heard at Business for America from many companies that the amount of effort and energy that human resource directors have to put into mediating conflicts between employees over political or social issues, that are increasingly becoming controversial, takes away from the overall productivity of the organization. And is that something that your research has confirmed is happening?
Oh, I mean, 100%, and accelerating. It's not as bad as it was a year and a half to 2 years ago, but all the more reason to believe it might be bad again next year. Tends to follow the news cycles, which follow the political cycles. But yes, it becomes a distraction in the workplace. Becomes at best a distraction. At worst, it gets into HR issues and the like. This lands itself in the workforce, all sorts of it makes a challenge sometimes to recruit key employees that are potentially at odds or believe they're potentially at odds with the values of the company that they're coming to work for, and there's that misunderstanding as well. That happens before they take the job. They may not even consider an opportunity at a company because of that misunderstanding.
Right, good. Joe, let me turn to you. And, in your capacity as the executive director of the Lower Bucks County Chamber of Commerce, I know you have said that it's one of your hopes and aspirations that more of your members get involved in civic life, in civic engagement, and understand the importance of elections, because, that affects the quality of life in the community. So as you think about what John described as some of the evolving problems, why is civic literacy important to a Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks for having me first, Richard. I appreciate it. For me, the way I kind of am I muted?
No, we can hear you there, Joe.
You can hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can.
Someone said I was muted. I apologize.
Go ahead.
The way I view it is that, when I look at a Chamber of Commerce, a Chamber of Commerce is a community organization. A lot of people just view a chamber as a business community organization, but a lot of my members are nonprofits. I work very closely with local governments and elected officials. And, I think it is essential that, the people in the community understand their role as informed citizens and active participants in the government and in the community. And, if the chamber is representing the community, they need to understand that, one of the things I try to look at these days is, you always say, hey, what value am I giving to businesses, right? As a chamber, I'm providing them, a return on their sort of investment. But also at the end of the day, I want members and I want people to know that when they're being involved with some organization like a Chamber of Commerce, you're making a difference in the broader community. I always say if you look at any community around the country, if there's a strong community, you more than likely have a strong Chamber of Commerce. And if you have a strong Chamber of Commerce, you're more than likely to have a strong community, because they really go hand in hand, because you really need that a person that knows what being a citizen of the United States is, sort of what you're required to do, what you should be doing. You're not supposed to just be going, noon, wake up to go to sleep and not educate yourself about what's going on around you, your community, the nation, and how interact with other organizations and raising your family, and there's a little bit of requirements involved, so to speak.
Right. And Joe, let me suggest maybe take yourself off camera because your connection is a little fuzzy. Maybe we'll be able to hear you better. Let me ask you a second question, and John indicated this, that the connection between a well-informed public relates to what we would call a healthy democracy, which also then I think contributes to economic well-being and economic prosperity. So when you think of the work of your local Chamber of Commerce or other chambers throughout Pennsylvania, what is the connection between civic literacy and economic prosperity? Is there a connection in your mind?
Yeah, I believe there is a connection. When you have a active, informed community, they're working to better their community. And when you have a community that is stable, that is well led, that has people actively, again, whether it's they're volunteering at nonprofits or doing being a volunteer coach, and they're actively voting, and they're taking making sure that they're electing qualified leaders, then you have a stronger community, that one that is encouraging business growth, one that is encouraging people to live there and work there. So again, if you have a community people want to move to and live in, then you're going to have businesses that are growing. You're going to have businesses that are moving in, and it's sort of that that positive cycle where if people want to live there, they want to visit there. If they want to visit there, they want to visit. They're going to want to live there. They want to live there. They're going to want to work there, and sort of that positivity. And again, you don't get that sort of that first component if you don't have active citizens engaged with whether it's the government process or just the process of building a community and knowing sort of what the expectations are.
Right. And Joe, are there examples of initiatives that your chamber has underway where your colleagues are connecting with local schools, or finding ways to increase either the business involvement or the employee involvement in civics?
Yeah. Interesting enough, we literally just had last Thursday. We had a membership breakfast where we had one of our university presidents at Cairn University. He spoke about civics and citizenship, and he went through the requirements there, where they require every single student to take a civics class as a freshman or sophomore. It's a 100% requirement. You can't graduate without taking it, and he teaches it himself, as a matter of fact. But he spoke, for 30 minutes, and he was very passionate about, our form of government and the role of citizens in our form of government. And I can't tell you, I had so many people of my members who were at the breakfast come up to me either after the breakfast or subsequently text me or email saying how much they enjoyed that. And I said, I don't get that usually, a lot of times, like, oh, that was nice. But I actually had it, our members really say that was a really enjoyable speaker, because he was talking about a topic that so many people, find interesting and engaging. And especially these are small business owners typically, or employees, and they know the value that, civics brings to them as they start a business, as they continue to grow their business and, stay in a community like Bucks County.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Before I turn to Elizabeth, John, let me go back to you and ask if, the role that the private sector can play. You are working, or counseling predominantly larger companies. So is the challenge the same for these larger firms, of which there are many in Pennsylvania, as there are for the constituency that Joe is representing?
I mean, maybe just on a larger scale. You can have a 4-person company with lots of disagreement as much as you can in those larger. I mean, there's maybe a different liability in those larger companies. Okay. I think where it lands with the larger companies in particular is really how it affects consumers, right? The buyers of their products. When you look at how polarization and institutional distrust is affecting consumerism today, and how companies that take particular positions on certain things or have certain policies that consumers punish them for those things, and it's a minefield of decision making again. So it doesn't just affect the workforce, but it affects the people that are buying their products. That tends to be more common among a larger company. So we talk as much about the consumer impact of these things as we do the workforce impact.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Elizabeth, let's bring you into the conversation. And you are representing a not-for-profit that provides educational curriculum and have worked in Pennsylvania, particularly in Philadelphia. And I know there are plans to extend the idea of civics days to Pittsburgh and other communities. And so briefly describe what Generation Citizen does and how you seek to partner with the private sector on this idea of increasing civic literacy among young people.
Well, thanks so much for bringing me into the conversation, and really, glad to be here and building off of what's already been shared today by fantastic researchers and educators. So I think there's a lot of consensus on this webinar today that real world democracy education is the high impact investment that our country needs and that our students need. And so what Generation Citizen has been doing for the last 13 years is partnering with school districts around the country to bring our project-based civics curriculum, our professional development training for teachers, and then ongoing coaching so that teachers are able to support their students as they move through a semester-long applied civics experience for middle schools and high schools. Mm-hmm. We have a culminating experience called Civics Day, which is where students really bring forward to the community the projects that they've been taking on over the semester. And that has been an incredible opportunity throughout our 13 years to bring business leaders into the auditorium or the State House or any of the venues where we hold the event. And they serve as community advisors who are hearing from the students. Now, what I love about Civics Day is it is a moment in which what the students have developed in their semester of civics is on display. And what we know is that many of the core civic skills that we're focused on are also 21st century career skills, right? So I like to talk about the 3 C's around critical thinking, which is so essential as young people are understanding how they can make progress on an issue that matters to them, and go from just seeing a topic that they may talk about with their friends or see in the paper to doing a root cause analysis and participatory action research to understand that issue from the root. We really support them to do deep critical thinking that is valuable in any setting. We're also supporting them to do deep collaboration, right? And that it is learning to work together, to talk with each other, knowing that you've come from different points of view, but that diversity makes you stronger, and that effective collaboration is part of what makes for a strong team project. Right? At the heart of our approach to civics education is to say the students together work on how they can take action on an issue that matters to them, but do it as a team, because that's how we function in our democracy. It's not just one student writing one paper, right? That's persuasive. It's about how do you work as a team, and that kind of collaboration mirrors what they need to be effective in the workplace. And finally, communication is on display at Civics Day, right? Young people are supported throughout the semester to strengthen their communication skills with a wide range of stakeholders. That's written communication when they're sending an email to someone at the Parks Department, right? To gather information on the issue that they're taking seriously. Or their verbal communication as they are testifying at a city hall hearing. They are absolutely developing these powerful civic skills alongside civic knowledge and civic motivation in a real world setting that will put them in good stead as citizens and as leaders throughout their careers.
Great. Liz, we have 2 more minutes, I've been told. So let me ask you what might be our final question, which is, how does the private sector participate in Generation Citizens' work?
Sure. So, the heart of our work is to support young people to recognize that their voices matter, right? And that they have civic agency even while they are students in school. One of the ways that it helps our students to understand that this isn't just it's not just a school project, right? That the issues they're taking on, like our students in Philadelphia who wanted to take on issues around student safety in public transit, issues around gun violence in their communities, issues around bullying and safety within their school walls. When they know that there are community leaders who are listening to them and who can come as advisors, that helps them strengthen those 3 C's. And so we invite business leaders to come in, and have been grateful to partner with BFA and others to invite business leaders from across sectors to come and hear what the students are doing, offer them feedback on their strategy and feedback on their communication that will help them move that work forward. And so we're grateful for the leadership that we're seeing from members of the business community who also serve as volunteers. And by coming as a cohort of team members who serve as volunteers listening to students, that's often a really powerful bonding experience for corporate teams and employees together that we have heard really great results from. So we think there's a mutual benefit for corporate partners to engage in Civics Day.
Great, thank you. Well, good. I know this could be a much longer conversation, but our time is up. So John and Joe and Elizabeth, thank you all so much. Business for America will be in touch with the broader community here. We would like to, really engage the private sector in much deeper conversation and action around civic education in the months to come. So thanks, everybody. And now let me turn the next session over to Joe Hoffel. Mr. Hoffel is a former member of Congress from 1999 to 2005. He served in the 13th District of Pennsylvania. He's also a former state representative and county commissioner. Joe, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and great panel. Enjoyed that very much. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Julia Kaufman. Dr. Kaufman is the Associate Director of Research for the RAND Corporation. She has written extensively on how state and school district policies affect how things really happen in the classroom. She's focused on civic literacy and engagement on behalf of students. Dr. Kaufman has a PhD in international education from New York University. And she has written critically about the disappointing results on the social studies assessment that was part of the National Assessment of Educational Progress. So, Julia, the floor is yours, and welcome.
Thank you so much. That was such a kind introduction. It's really lovely to be here. So as a parent of 2 high school age kids, one at a public charter school and another at a big public high school in Pittsburgh, I think a lot about what it would take for my kids to have the same opportunities to learn civic knowledge and skills in their schools. They don't have the same opportunities. I'm working as a parent to fill those gaps, and they're doing just fine. But I believe that we can't ensure equitable, high quality social studies teaching and learning without more systemic actions by stakeholders like at the state level, at the district level, at the school level, teachers working in collaboration together. Individual efforts are amazing. Listening to Nathan talk about the things he does in the classroom are amazing. Schools that are doing really wonderful things to make a real difference for children in terms of their civic knowledge and skills. And that's not nothing. But I worry about the children who don't have that teacher, who don't have Nathan, who cares about social studies so deeply, or don't have schools that place priority on social studies. So when I think about what is needed to improve social studies knowledge in a sustained and equitable way, I think that really it's only possible through better policy. So when I think about sustained improvements that could happen across schools to improve civics, I think about systemic actions that impact whole systems and not just one classroom or one school. Although those things are really important, we need that ground up focus, but we also need top-down work. So let me just give you kind of some examples of some of the systemic actions that I think could be really important. One is just to be able to provide information to parents across the state about what civics knowledge and skills their children have and what do they really need to learn. No one, not states, not schools, not parents, really deeply understand or have any sense of alarm about how our children are doing in social studies. Although we know from the National Assessment of Educational Progress that kids' knowledge in social studies is about what it was now back in 1998. when NAEP was first administered. It's gone down that much. And it has not been improving. It's been kind of flat and declining since the pandemic. So, you know, even more broadly, most parents who are surveyed think their kids are doing mostly okay, but at least in math and reading, there's broad agreement that what children should be knowing in math and reading, there's broad agreement about what that is. And there's broad agreement that kids aren't doing necessarily so well in those subjects because we know they've missed out on about a half a year of learning during the pandemic on average. We need that in civics. We need to help parents know whether their children understand how their government works, what history can tell us about how we got to where we are now and what it means to be a citizen. So that's one thing. Another linked action to helping parents and teachers understand civic knowledge and skills that students need and why they need it is to have really good assessments. So we have Act 35, and that is huge progress on that front in Pennsylvania to have that requirement that schools assess. An even more exciting step would be to see districts working together to develop assessments so that not everyone is recreating the wheel, and so that I could compare my child from one school with my child from another school and see how they're doing, and we could compare from district to district. And then another systemic action is to help teachers. We've talked a lot about amazing teachers today, and we've talked to amazing teachers, but teachers need help to teach civics. Roughly 1/3 of elementary principals and about 20% of secondary school principals report that teachers are provided with no curriculum materials as a requirement or recommendation for social studies. None. So what does that mean? That means it's likely that kids across PA could be getting amazing instruction, but many children could be missing critical social studies content that other students are getting. So it's just not equitable. I mean, I love the proliferation of civics materials that groups like PA Civics are putting out. Materials are a great start, but they're not enough to change instruction. We know that. I know that from studying materials and encouraging use and adoption of materials in classrooms. Just creating them is not enough. What is also really important is for school leaders to think about knowing when they see them, whether materials are high quality, whether they're closely aligned with standards, whether they're engaging. Like some of the Generation Citizen materials are really great, helping them explore and problem solve. But then, of course, helping teachers by providing those materials to them and then providing them with lots of supports. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is just one data point, one of the ways that we collect data on our American Educator panels. These are nationally representative panels of teachers that respond to our surveys. And some of what I'm showing on this data slide, this is just elementary teachers across the United States. So we ask them how much time they spend with their students on learning activities in different subject areas. So you can see here the differences between social studies and ELA and math and science. You know, it's not surprising that teachers at the elementary school level spend much more time on ELA and math than they do social studies. But the number of hours on learning activities per week, 3, that's pretty low. But another thing to think about here is we also ask teachers how much time they spend on instructional planning for each subject area. And you can see that teachers report spending 2 hours of time on instructional planning for social studies, despite only spending 3 hours of instructional time on social studies. So what that means is that teachers spend more time planning each hour of social studies instruction than they do each hour of their ELA instruction, each hour of their math instruction. And we think that this inefficiency might be related just to the lack of guidance and supports that teachers get. And they just cobble a lot of materials together. It's a lot of work. They're not provided with instructional materials. Beyond instructional materials, thinking about how to support and guide them in our data, when we ask principals whether they're evaluating in social studies, only about 2/3 say they're evaluating social studies instruction, while evaluations of math and ELA instruction, pretty much universal. 100% of principals say that they're looking at math and ELA instruction when they're evaluating. Similarly, when we ask teachers about professional development, teachers report far fewer professional development opportunities in social studies than other subjects. And they're also less likely to report shared teaching practices in social studies than other subjects. So we see this trend of lack of support, which then translates into teachers spending a lot of time trying to do the work themselves. And so when I think about infrastructure for social studies, I think about the supports that both schools and teachers need so that kids can be getting equitable instruction. Thank you so much.
Julia, thank you for your presentation. And we appreciate the research that you've done and your good efforts. Now it's time for all of us to have a chance to ask some questions and get some great answers from our panelists. And Justin Valaire of the Committee of 70 will be our moderator. Justin?
Hi, all. Thank you very much for those of you who have entered questions in the chat. We've had a few come in. The first that came up kind of around Abby's presentation, so I might throw this to her. Where are the school's data regarding Act 35 requirements and tests posted on the PDE website? Since we are, in his words, required by law to report them to PDE, are they made public facing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I'll say I sort of encountered this through a few years ago through writing my dissertation and wanting to find the materials, and they are public facing. It's not particularly easy to access. I was able to do so by emailing around. And so I just think in general, it would be helpful to make this more accessible for the many interested people who want to learn more. And then I would just add, and I'm just rereading your question, so that, yes, they're made public facing and it is required by law to report them. I would just say that, and very much aligned with Julia's presentation, it would be helpful to have more information. And so I just want to name that that's, I am a researcher, so this is coming from the perspective of wanting to know as much information as possible. And of course, giving information is a burden to practitioners. And so, we want to balance. We don't want to ask too much of teachers and LEAs and districts. But I think more information could be really helpful, including, questions around pass rate, though this is aligned to, I think, Thomas Quinn's question about assessment. How many students took the test that is currently listed, but out of how many possible students, we don't really have a proportion here yet that we can look at. So I think there's ways that we can, without putting too much burden on educators and folks who are reporting, I think there are ways that we can ask for more information. And then also more directly to your question, make sure that it's easily accessible to anyone who's interested in that information.
I'm muted. Sorry, you referenced this. I'm going to make sure that everyone who's viewing this saw this question. What is the possibility of developing a Model Act 35 assessment or guidelines that address the 3 civic pillars: knowledge, skills, and actions? So he referenced Julia and Abby for both this. So jump ball, either one of you want to take this.
Julia, you want to start off on that one?
Oh, Abby, I feel like you know so much more about Act 35 because you've been studying it, but I feel like a model assessment would be lovely. Nothing that's necessarily telling school districts this is what you have to use, but something that they can trust is high quality and gets at the things that we care about. But I do agree with you, Abby, totally what you were talking about with bubble tests and standardized assessments. They don't get at everything. But it's really hard to develop those other assessments that get at skills and in a really high quality way. So providing models would be amazing for that too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'll just add, like in my dream list world, that there's big funds from somewhere where we can have expert teachers like we had here today, community members, folks like Generation Citizen, like all coming together. And again, Thomas, to your question, developing a model Act 35, we know that's and again, to Julia's point, like not a requirement, but sort of a possible outline, sort of like the C3 framework, like a framework of what is possible to help provide resources to educators. In terms of the possibility, like I said, I think that it's possible, it's completely doable. We have the expertise, we have we have incredible educators in the Commonwealth. It's about, making sure that people are being remunerated for their time in a variety of ways. I think I'll just add, and this is sort of one of the things that I was saying, and then I'll stop talking and pass the baton. But one of the things that I really, really feel strongly, especially after 7 years as a high school social studies teacher, but now in my research, is that we need to move beyond sort of traditional teaching formats. So there, as the teacher said, we need to continue with thinking about norms and student voice. We also need to think about how can we make sure that all students across the Commonwealth, the nation, have access to rigorous and thoughtful and aligned and relevant engaged learning. And that is a nonpartisan endeavor. That is good learning. That is good pedagogy, and it would allow students to have a primary voice and leading with the content that matters to them in their local communities. So that's a lot of work. Teachers aren't trained, I'll just say my husband he's a public school high school teacher. He wasn't trained in his program for that. So like there's a lot of factors that need to come into play for how can we support teachers? How can we create models that are bipartisan? But I think collaborating here today is part of the very necessary work.
I think we have one more question. This is a very any jump off for any panelist. This is probably a difficult one to answer, but does anyone foresee a future in which we have additional policy requirements or funding that passes out of the General Assembly in Pennsylvania, maybe build an Act 35 or any of these other policy ideas that have been put forth? Any panelist can take this one.
I'll just jump in and say that, like, if you don't fund a policy requirement, and I would love to hear from Elizabeth on this too. If you don't fund a policy requirement, the work and the burden goes directly to schools and teachers. And they're all trying to do this at the same time. It just doesn't make as much sense as working together. And so I feel such a good question, but I can't really answer when.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would encourage folks who are interested in moving in this direction to look at Massachusetts as a strong example of where, the Civic Education Trust Fund has been a powerful engine for ensuring more equitable, opportunity for high quality civics education. In the case of Massachusetts and in other states, the focus is really on experiential civics education and ensuring that students graduate with a civic action project. But they know that you have to put resources behind it. Otherwise, you risk reinforcing inequities between higher resource schools that already typically have more on-ramps to project-based learning and lower resource schools that often are in politically marginalized communities historically, may continue to kind of lose out on the opportunity to add this more rigorous approach to civics education. So for folks thinking about it, I think the approach to focus on some resources that get behind this, both from the private sector and philanthropy, but importantly from the public sector to really stand behind this as an engine of stronger democracy and an engine of more effective learning.
And I would just want to add too that some policy requirements cost less than others. And so, providing information at the state level, this is what we regard as high quality. This is what we regard, and giving really clear reviews about how something is high quality. That's really a support for teachers to be able to choose things. A way to negotiate with a publisher to get a good price for a particular set of materials. That's not going to cost as much to states, but it provides like a payoff for the school. So those are other ways to think about funding in terms of like things that could support schools and teachers.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for jumping in on those not easy questions to answer. So I'm going to bring Lauren Christella and Jim Gerlach back on to close this out. But thank you to our panelists and really appreciate the robust conversation.
My goodness, what an incredible program. I know I learned so much just to highlight some of the phrases and things and concepts that we've heard: connection, making things relevant, assessments, systemic change, right? So many important concepts and approaches to doing this work. We hope that you have gained some resources. Of course, you can go to pacivics.org for more from each of the partner organizations and from the coalition itself. We hope to continue to be a resource and help with the systemic change and support teachers in the way that they needed so that we can reach every student in Pennsylvania with quality civic education. I'll turn it over to Jim for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Lauren. And first of all, thank you to all of our panelists and all of our great staff, PA Civics, that have really worked hard to put this really fine program together today. I really appreciate all your hard work and all this. Boy, we have a lot of great stuff that's happened in Pennsylvania recently, but a lot of things we have to continue to work on together to move civics education forward in Pennsylvania. A lot of challenges all across the state, in terms of getting civics education before our students and educators in the way that it should be, so we can improve those scores, improve that civic education level for all of our students across Pennsylvania, regardless of the school district or school that you're in. So the bright spot today from my participating is there's so many great people out there across Pennsylvania that want to chip in and work together to make this a reality, progressing with our civics education standards, with our testing, with our teacher development, and then ultimately our outcomes. And so if we go into all of this and continue all of this with that mindset, we're going to make great progress together. So look, as Lauren said, look at our partners that are part of PA Civics and see how they individually or us collectively can assist in your work. And also, speaking from the former members of Congress perspective, we've got some great former members that would be, I'm sure, happy to work with you and get engaged in their local areas because they have a great interest in what's going to happen here in the future with our students. So we can certainly give you a list of those to work with you. So other than that, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for the great program, and look forward to doing this again soon as we all work together to improve civics education in Pennsylvania.